Widowed teacher takes in a struggling student. 20 years later, he comes back with a surprise. The boy stood trembling in the rain, soaked to the bone, gripping a torn backpack like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. Behind the screen door, she watched Hyman image from her past, one she wasn't sure she could handle reliving. Mrs. Evelyn Carter had never meant to take in another child. Not since her own heart had been torn in two by the silence of an empty house and the echo of a husband's last breath. At 62, Evelyn taught third grade in the same sleepy town she'd grown up in, walked the same narrow road to the small public school, and returned each night to a home that creaked with memories and hollow evenings. It was during one of those walks home, the winter wind biting at her scarf, that she first noticed him. He was sitting under the bleachers by the baseball field, hoodie pulled tight, face hidden. At first she thought he was skipping class, but then she saw the duffel bag. The way he clutched it, like it was everything he owned. His name was Mason, and he didn't want help. "I'm fine," he'd snapped when she approached. But she saw the way his lips trembled from more than just the cold. She saw the bruises peeking from under his sleeves. She saw herself 30 years younger, standing in the wreckage of a life no one came to rescue. "I'm not here to save you," she said simply. "But if you need a place to sleep, I have an old sofa and some leftover stew." He didn't answer, but he followed her home. That first night, he didn't say a word. Not when she handed him a towel and pajamas 2 sizes too big. Not when she placed the chipped bowl of stew in front of him. Not even when she laid a folded blanket on the couch and quietly said, "You're safe here." But at 2 in the morning, Evelyn woke to soft sobs from the living room. He stayed one night, then another, and another. He never explained. She never asked. Instead, she started setting out 2 plates for breakfast. She left clean socks on the coffee table. She taught her classes, came home, and listened to the faint sound of video games from the living room. He slowly began to speak, then laugh. He even smiled once. Just once. But it was enough to know he had it in him. The neighbors talked. Some said she was crazy. Others warned her boys like that bring trouble. But Evelyn had lived through trouble. She'd loved a man who fought in a war and never quite came home. She'd buried her only son before he turned 18. She knew heartbreak, and she knew the quiet desperation of being overlooked. So she made space for Mason. And in return, Mason changed. He started going to school again. He got a job stocking shelves at the corner store. He brought home a puppy once skinny, with 1 floppy ear. Evelyn nearly sent them both packing, but the way Mason looked at that dog like he needed to protect something, she couldn't bring herself to say no. They named her Muffin. 3 years later, Mason left. There was no dramatic farewell. No hug. Just a letter on the kitchen counter, written in his messy scrawl. "Thank you. I'll come back one day. I promise." And then he was gone. Evelyn kept teaching. The house got quieter again. Muffin grew old. The sofa stayed covered in that same faded quilt. And the note stayed tucked in her kitchen drawer, yellowing with time. 20 years passed. She didn't expect to see him again. She didn't expect anything, really. Until the morning the black SUV pulled into her driveway. She was trimming her rose bushes, hands caked in soil, back aching from bending over too long. When she straightened up, the man was already out of the car, tall, clean-cut, mid-30s, holding a bouquet of white lilies and eyes that shimmered with a memory she couldn't quite place. Then he smiled, and she knew. "Mason," she whispered. He looked different, grown, successful. His suit was tailored, and the watch on his wrist was more than she made in a month of teaching. But the way his eyes softened, the way he stood with his hands half in his pockets like he didn't know where to begin, that was her boy. "I told you I'd come back," he said. Evelyn's hands trembled. "I wasn't sure if you meant it." "I did," he said. "I always did." Then he motioned to the SUV, and the back door opened. A small girl stepped out, 7, maybe 8. Curly hair tied in pink ribbons. Eyes wide with curiosity. She clutched a well-loved stuffed bunny, its ears nearly threadbare. "This is Lila," Mason said. "My daughter." Lila ran up and hugged Evelyn's leg without a word, as if she'd known her forever. "And this," Mason stepped aside. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore." Evelyn blinked. "What?" "I bought you a new one. 10 minutes from here. All on 1 floor, no stairs. A garden out back. You've done enough for me. Now it's my turn." She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. "You saved my life," he said, voice cracking. "And I know you'll say you didn't. But you did. You gave me warmth when the world was ice. You gave me quiet when all I knew was noise. You gave me a mother when I didn't have one. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. She hadn't cried in years, not even at Muffin's funeral. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I know, Mason said, but I want to. Then he pulled from his jacket a thick envelope. Inside was a deed. In her name. Fully paid. He wasn't done yet. I also started a foundation. For kids like me. We called it Carter House. She gasped. For kids who just need someone to believe in them, Mason said softly. Just like you did. Evelyn looked at the man in front of her, the boy who once clung to a torn backpack, who slept on her sofa and cried into a pillow at night, and she realized something she hadn't dared to believe. Love, when given freely, never disappears. It just takes root in someone else and grows into something extraordinary. Evelyn couldn't speak. Her fingers clutched the deed, the crisp edge trembling against her palm. The sun had peeked through the clouds by then, casting a soft, golden light on the porch where they stood. Lila's little arms wrapped tighter around her leg, grounding Evelyn to the moment. I don't know what to say, Evelyn finally whispered. Mason chuckled, gently. You don't have to say anything. Just let me do this. Let me give you what I couldn't give you back then. She looked at him, really looked. His eyes, though older, still carried the same flicker of vulnerability. His shoulders were broader now, his voice deeper, but the essence of the boy she once welcomed into her home was still there, quiet, observant, always carrying more weight than he let on. You always had this fire in you, Mason, she said, voice breaking. I just never thought I'd live long enough to see it burn so bright. Mason's jaw clenched. His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for you. They stood in silence for a beat, the kind that holds 1,000 unsaid things. Then Evelyn reached out and touched his cheek gently. Come inside. I think the sofa's still in the same spot, and I might still have a jar of that terrible instant coffee you used to sneak when you thought I wasn't looking. He laughed, a full, free sound. God, that stuff was awful. You drank it like it was gold, she teased, already leading them toward the front door. Inside, the house hadn't changed much. The wallpaper had peeled in places, the old curtains hung tiredly, and the scent of lavender and wood polish still lingered faintly in the air. Lila skipped beside Mason, her eyes wide. Is this where you lived when you were a kid? Mason looked around, nostalgia softening his features. Yeah, this is where everything started. Evelyn gave her a smile. And now you're the next chapter. Lila beamed. They sat together in the cozy living room, the same faded quilt covering the sofa. Evelyn poured real coffee this time, with a hint of cinnamon the way Mason liked it. She placed a plate of oatmeal cookies on the table, still slightly warm from the batch she made that morning, not knowing who they were meant for. Mason reached for one. Still baking. Old habits, she said. And I guess part of me always hoped someone would show up. He nodded, swallowing hard. I used to picture this moment. All the time. I'd imagine coming back, doing something big. I wanted to make you proud. You did, she said. Every single day you chose to keep going, that made me proud. I didn't need you to come back in a fancy car. I just needed to know you were okay. Mason looked down. I wasn't always okay. Not for a long time. After I left, I made some bad choices. Evelyn stayed silent, letting him speak. I bounced around. Slept on floors. Couch surfed. Worked 3 jobs to keep myself in community college. I barely made it through. But then I met a mentor. Someone who reminded me of you. Sounds like a good person, Evelyn said. She was, he nodded. She gave me a job at a youth center. That's when I knew what I wanted to do. Help kids. Just like I was. And I worked my way through a degree. Took me 7 years. But I finished. Evelyn's eyes filled again. I kept your note. You know, Mason said suddenly. The one you left on the fridge the first morning I stayed. She blinked. I barely remember that. It said, the door is always open. For you, the light will always be on. I carried that with me. Whenever I felt like giving up, I'd read it again. Evelyn wiped her eyes. I meant every word. I know. Just then, Lila came over, holding an old photo from the bookshelf. Daddy, who's this? Mason took the frame from her. It was a faded picture of him barely 15 standing in front of Evelyn's house, holding Muffin, grinning wide. Evelyn stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, looking tired but proud. That's me and Evelyn, he said gently. Back when she saved my life. Lila's eyebrows rose. You look so young. He chuckled. I was. And scared. You're not scared now, she said, matter-of-factly. No, he smiled. Not anymore. Evelyn leaned forward. You've done beautifully, Mason. You've become the man I always believed was in there. He hesitated, then said softly, There's one more thing I wanted to ask you. Evelyn tilted her head. I know you've got your life, and I don't want to ask too much. But Lila, she needs a strong woman in her life. Someone with patience. Someone who knows how to make oatmeal cookies and remind her she's important when she forgets. Evelyn felt her breath catch. I want her to know you. I want her to have what I had. If you're willing. It was the kind of question that could split hearts and two could dig into the quiet places Evelyn had locked away for decades. But the moment she looked into Lila's wide, hopeful eyes, the answer came to her like spring follows winter. I would love that, she whispered. Lila clapped. Yay. Can I come over after school sometimes? You can come over anytime, Evelyn said. And I've got 100 stories about your dad. Want to hear how he broke my favorite lamp playing baseball in the hallway? Mason groaned. You kept that story? Oh, I kept everything. Evelyn smiled. Even the time you tried to make spaghetti and nearly burned the kitchen down. Lila giggled, wide-eyed. You did that, Daddy? Traitor, he muttered, nudging Evelyn with a grin. That night, they stayed for dinner. Evelyn made her famous chicken pot pie, and they ate at the same small table Mason once sat at alone. Now it was filled with laughter, stories, and the clink of silverware and second helpings. Before they left, Mason hugged her at the door. This time, it wasn't awkward or silent. It was long and tight, filled with everything that didn't need to be said. You'll come visit the new house tomorrow? He asked. If I don't, I'm sure Lila will drag me there herself. He smiled. Good. As the car pulled away, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching until the taillights disappeared down the hill. She stepped back inside, house still warm from the oven and the voices that had filled it for the first time in years. On the kitchen table, Lila had left the photo frame, her tiny fingerprint smudges still on the glass. Evelyn sat down slowly, holding it in her lap. Her heart felt full in a way it hadn't since the world first took her family from her. She had lost so much. But somehow, through pain and time and love, something beautiful had come back to her. Not by blood, but by choice, by grace, and by a boy who once had nothing and returned with everything. The next morning, Evelyn stood at the edge of her garden, arms folded loosely, eyes scanning the driveway. The roses she once tended with casual care now seemed to bloom brighter as if they too had waited for something, or someone, to return. A bird chirped from the low-hanging branch of the maple tree that shaded her porch. The day was gentle, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the heaviness of time pressing on her chest. The ache in her joints was still there, but it didn't feel quite as cruel. At exactly 10, Mason's SUV pulled up again. This time, Lila bounded out before the engine was even off, skipping up the walkway with her backpacks swinging from one shoulder. Grandma Evelyn, she cried, wrapping her arms around the older woman's waist. Evelyn chuckled. We're already at Grandma. Lila looked up with a shy smile. Daddy said I could call you that if it's okay. Evelyn nodded slowly, tears stinging the back of her eyes again. I would be honored. Mason walked up behind her, grinning. Told you she'd say yes. He carried a small cardboard box under one arm. We brought muffins from that bakery on Main. You still like blueberry? I never stopped. Evelyn smiled, holding the door open for them. Inside, everything felt new and old all at once. Lila wandered through the house like it was a museum, pausing to peer into rooms and tugging Mason's arm every time she saw something cool, like the old cuckoo clock or the collection of vintage recipe books still stacked near the stove. After muffins and milk and coffee for the grown-ups, Mason reached for the box he brought. I went through some old stuff, he said, lifting the lid. Thought maybe you'd want to see. He pulled out a weathered spiral notebook. The cover had half-torn stickers and scribbled lyrics from songs he used to play on Evelyn's dusty cassette player. Inside were pages and pages of clumsy handwriting essays, short stories, journal entries. I used to write a lot, he said. Back when I lived here. You told me it was a good way to get the noise out. Evelyn took the notebook gently. You were always better with words than you gave yourself credit for. Mason smiled, pulling out more items, a drawing he'd done of Muffin, a homemade Mother's Day card with crooked letters, and a photo Evelyn didn't remember ever seeing. a candid picture of her, asleep in the armchair, Mason in the background trying to cook eggs, smoke rising from the pan. "That one's legendary," Mason said. Evelyn laughed aloud. "I remember the smell. You nearly set off the smoke alarm." "It was my first time cracking an egg," he said with mock pride. "Gave me trauma." They laughed again, but there was tenderness beneath the humor. Shared history, built not through blood, but through something more powerful: choice, sacrifice, silent care. After lunch, Mason asked, "Can I show you the new house?" Evelyn hesitated, glancing around the space that had held her grief and hope for over 30 years. But then she looked at Mason, grown, steady, and Lila, bouncing from room to room like she'd already claimed it as her second home. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Let's go." The drive was short, winding through familiar streets and past landmarks Evelyn hadn't visited in years: the bookstore that had once hosted poetry readings, the small diner where her husband used to bring her on Sunday mornings. The new house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, painted soft blue with white shutters and a wraparound porch. It looked like something from one of Evelyn's favorite novels. A garden bloomed out front, roses, of course, and sunflowers leaning toward the light. Mason helped her up the porch steps and opened the door. The inside was airy and bright. Everything was designed with care. Wide doorways, no steps, light switches placed lower, a reading nook with a window seat, and shelves already half filled with books. In the kitchen, a pot rack hung above a central island, and by the window was a stool and a set of baking trays, as if waiting for her hands to come alive again. "I had help designing it," Mason said. "I remembered how much you loved cooking and how your knees started bothering you. I wanted it to feel like you." Evelyn ran a hand over the polished counter. "It's beautiful, Mason, but you didn't have to do all this." He looked her straight in the eyes. "I did, because it's not just a house. It's everything you gave me: safety, warmth, a chance to dream. I just put it into bricks and wood." Lila tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "There's a room just for you. Want to see it?" She led Evelyn down a hallway to a bedroom painted in calming lavender. A rocking chair stood by the window, and on the dresser sat a photo of Evelyn and Mason from years ago, now framed in dark oak. "There's more," Mason said, opening a closet. Inside were boxes labeled with dates and names: photos from school, letters from Mason's college days, awards he had won. He had kept everything. Every scrap of memory Evelyn had long forgotten or never knew existed. "I wasn't ready to share these until now," he said. "But I want you to see the whole story." Evelyn turned slowly, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," Mason said. "Every night you left the porch light on. Every time you left a note in my lunch. Every day you reminded me I mattered, even when I didn't believe it." That night, they ordered dinner in burgers and milkshakes, just like old times. Lila curled up on the couch next to Evelyn as they watched an old cartoon on TV. Mason sat on the floor, leaning back against the couch, his smile never fading. Before bed, Lila gave Evelyn a drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures standing in front of the new house. One had gray curly hair and a smile as wide as the sun. Beneath it, she had written in crooked block letters, "My family." When Mason tucked Lila in that night, she asked, "Can Grandma Evelyn stay with us all the time?" He kissed her forehead. "We'll ask her, okay?" But when he turned, Evelyn was already standing in the doorway, eyes warm. "I think I'd like that very much," she said. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn Carter fell asleep in a house that didn't echo with loss, but hummed with life, full of voices, laughter, and a love that had come full circle. Evelyn awoke to the scent of pancakes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The lavender walls, the morning sun bleeding gently through soft linen curtains. It was all unfamiliar, yet somehow it felt like home. Not the kind of home built over decades, but one born from something deeper. A home created from being wanted again. She slipped on her robe and stepped into the hall, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. Down the hallway, Lila's high-pitched giggle rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of a spatula clattering against a skillet. When Evelyn entered the kitchen, Mason looked up from the stove, sheepishly. "I swear I'm better at this than I was when I was 15. Considering you nearly caught fire the first time," Evelyn said dryly. "I suppose anything is an improvement." He grinned. Lila ran up to her, arms outstretched. "Grandma, I made the scrambled eggs." They smell delicious, Evelyn said, lifting her chin with regal approval. You've clearly inherited none of your father's kitchen disasters. Mason pretended to be offended, placing the pancakes on the table with a theatrical flourish. We're a team now. Be gentle with your critiques. They sat together at the breakfast table, 3 generations not linked by blood, but by something stronger: history, choice, and the courage to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. Halfway through breakfast, Lila looked up from her plate and asked innocently, "Grandma Evelyn, did you ever have a daughter?" Evelyn paused, fork in midair. Mason immediately glanced toward her, unsure if she'd want to answer. But Evelyn surprised them both. "I didn't," she said softly. "Just one son. His name was Nathan." Lila nodded. "What happened to him?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "He passed away in an accident. A long time ago." The little girl's face fell. "I'm sorry." "Thank you, sweetheart," Evelyn said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "He was a good boy. Kind. Funny. A little mischievous, like your father." Mason's eyes softened. "You never talked much about him." "I couldn't," Evelyn admitted. "It hurt too much. But lately I've realized keeping it all locked away only made the silence louder." Lila stood from her chair and gave Evelyn the most honest gift a child can give: an embrace, without conditions. Evelyn hugged her tightly, her heart squeezing in ways that felt like grief and healing at the same time. After breakfast, they visited Carter House. It was a 2-story brick building nestled between the public library and a park. There was a small plaque out front that read, "Carter House, a safe place to begin again." Evelyn stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the letters of her name, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. Mason unlocked the door and led her inside. The lobby was warm, painted in muted colors. To the left, a room filled with secondhand furniture where kids could rest. To the right, a kitchen stocked with canned goods, snacks, and a chalkboard with a handwritten note that read, "You are stronger than your worst day." Mason showed her the classroom's upstairs rooms for tutoring, music lessons, and therapy. He introduced her to 2 staff members, Vanessa, a social worker with kind eyes, and Jordan, a volunteer who once lived at the center himself. They both hugged Evelyn like she was already part of the team. "Your story is why this place exists," Vanessa said. "Every kid that walks through these doors has a shot, because you gave Mason one." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything special." "You believed in him," Vanessa said. "That's more than most people ever do." By the time they left, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt since her husband was alive: purpose. Later that week, Mason gave her her own set of keys. "Only if you want them," he said. "You don't have to be involved. But I thought maybe you'd like to come around. Meet the kids." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that." And so she began to show up. At first, just once a week. Then twice. Then nearly every day. She brought cookies, helped organize art supplies, and even led a small book club for the younger kids. They started calling her Miss E or Grams, depending on the day. She listened to their stories raw, often painful. Kids abandoned, ignored, beaten down by life before they had even reached high school. But she never judged. She only offered them what she once gave Mason: presence, warmth, and quiet faith. One afternoon, a boy named Trey, barely 13, approached her with cautious eyes. "You really took him in? Just like that?" "I did," Evelyn said gently. "Why?" the boy asked. "Because someone needed to," she replied. "Because sometimes, when the world shuts a door on you, someone has to open a window." He nodded, though she could see he didn't fully understand. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I'll teach you how to bake banana bread." He did. And the next day, he stayed longer. And so the cycle began again. One afternoon, Mason came by Carter House to find Evelyn on the back porch, surrounded by 3 teenagers and a tray of burnt cookies. "We might have missed the timer," she said sheepishly. Mason just smiled and sat beside her, quietly watching the joy ripple through the kids. "You know," he said after a while, "this place, what it's become, feels like it was always meant for you." "I think it was meant for all of us," Evelyn said. "You, me, these children." "Still," he said, voice softer now, "none of this would have happened if you hadn't opened your door." Evelyn looked at him, eyes shining. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone for that walk that day. If I hadn't noticed you under the bleachers." Mason looked out at the yard, where Lila was playing with 2 younger kids, twirling in circles. then I wouldn't be standing here. None of this would. He paused. And I wouldn't have my daughter. Evelyn nodded, blinking away the tears. You gave me the chance to become a father, he said. To be the kind of man I wish my own had been. And then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Don't panic, it's not a proposal, he joked quickly, and Evelyn laughed. He opened the box. Inside was a silver locket. He handed it to her. Evelyn opened it slowly. On one side was a tiny photo of Mason as a teenager, tired but smiling, the day they had baked their first successful cake. On the other side was a photo of Lila, beaming with a missing front tooth. Etched beneath the photos were 5 simple words. Thank you for choosing me. Evelyn gasped softly, covering her mouth. It's not enough, Mason said, but I wanted you to have it. She clutched the locket to her chest. It's more than enough. They sat together in silence after that, the kind of silence that needed no words. Years passed. Evelyn eventually moved fully into the new home, though she still visited her old house once in a while, tending the garden and brushing dust off old memories. She remained active at Carter House until her hands grew too tired and her knees too stiff. But even then, she still came sitting in her chair, reading stories aloud to new children with old wounds. And every so often, she would glance across the room at Mason, now director of the foundation, speaking at fundraisers, mentoring staff, holding his daughter's hand as she grew from little girl to young woman. And she would smile, because she knew. Her greatest legacy was not in the years she taught at school, or the house she kept, or the sorrow she had endured. It was in the life she had touched, and the lives that life had touched in return. Years slipped by quietly, as they often do when life is full. Evelyn aged gracefully, though her body no longer carried the energy it once did. Her hands became slower, her movements more deliberate, but her mind remained sharp, her words always full of warmth. Carter House grew from a modest shelter to a respected foundation, expanding into neighboring towns, training volunteers, and helping hundreds of children find their footing. Wherever Evelyn went, she was treated with reverence, not out of obligation, but out of love. She was no longer just Miss E or Grams. To many, she was the seed from which their new lives had grown. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves crunched underfoot and golden light filtered through the trees, Carter House celebrated its 20th anniversary. Mason had planned everything. He stood at the podium in the courtyard, surrounded by fairy lights, rows of chairs filled with past and present residents, staff, community members, and donors. Evelyn sat near the front in a cozy armchair draped with a knitted shawl Lila had made years ago. Her eyes were soft with tears, hands folded neatly in her lap as Mason took the microphone. 20 years ago, he began, Carter House was just an idea, a dream I had, born from a moment in my life where everything could have gone wrong. But it didn't, because someone chose to see me. He looked toward Evelyn. Many of you know her as Grandma Evelyn. Some of you know her as the cookie lady, or the woman who gives the best hugs. But to me, she's the reason I'm here. He took a deep breath, emotion tightening his voice. I was a scared, angry kid with nothing but a torn backpack and too much pride. She didn't fix me. She didn't force anything on me. She just opened her door. And she kept it open, even when I didn't know how to say thank you. He stepped closer to Evelyn now, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything I've done, the man I became, the father I am. This place, it all traces back to one act of compassion. The crowd fell into a deep, reverent silence. And tonight, we want to honor her. He motioned toward a staff member, who wheeled out a small covered statue. Mason removed the cloth, revealing a bronze sculpture of Evelyn seated, hands resting in her lap, face lifted slightly, as if listening to a child's story. The plaque beneath it read, Evelyn Carter, the light that never turned off. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Children clapped wildly. Staff members wiped tears from their eyes. Some of the teens who had once come in off the street, now adults with families of their own, cheered the loudest. Evelyn blinked, overwhelmed. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked before she could find the words. Instead, she reached for Mason's hand and simply mouthed, "Thank you." After the ceremony, guests came in waves, hugging her, telling her stories of how Carter House saved them, how her words had lingered, how her quiet strength had changed the course of their lives. Lila, now a young woman in college, knelt beside her at the end of the night. "You always told me stories when I was little," she said. "Now I have one about you to tell my kids someday." Evelyn cupped her granddaughter's face. "Just make sure you tell them it all started with one boy who needed a place to sleep and one old woman too stubborn to let the world turn cold." They laughed, and Evelyn stayed long after the lights dimmed, watching as her house glowed in the twilight like a beacon. Months passed. One winter morning, snow dusted the sidewalks outside Evelyn's home. Lila had stopped by with hot chocolate and her usual smile, dropping off groceries and chatting about finals. Mason called later that evening, promising to pick her up for brunch that weekend. That night, Evelyn sat in her favorite chair by the window. She wrote in her journal, as she always did, the pen gliding slowly, the words calm and certain. "If this is the closing chapter, then let it be soft. Let it be full. Let it be enough." She folded the journal closed. And sometime between midnight and morning, Evelyn Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep. No struggle, no noise, just stillness, like the final note of a long, beautiful song. The funeral was small but overflowing. The town came. Former students. Dozens of Carter House children, now adults. Many with families flew in from across the country. They filled the pews in silence, some carrying roses, others carrying memories tucked into their hearts. Mason delivered the eulogy. He stood before them, grief raw in his chest, but love holding him steady. "She wasn't my mother by blood," he said, "but she mothered my soul. She taught me that sometimes the family you choose can heal the places your past has torn apart." He looked around the room, at the faces shaped by her legacy. She gave when she had nothing. She listened when the world was too loud. And she believed, oh God, she believed in every lost kid who crossed her path. He paused. Some people plant trees whose shade they'll never sit in. Evelyn Carter didn't just plant a tree, she built a forest. Carter House remained open, stronger than ever. And in the lobby, just beneath her statue, a glass case held the silver locket Mason had given her years before. Inside were the photos and her final journal page, framed with care. Above it, engraved in gold, "The light she lit will never go out." Years later, Lila stood before a new class of volunteers at Carter House. She wore her grandmother's shawl and held a stack of index cards, but didn't need them. "My grandmother taught me everything I know about love," she said. She didn't chase after recognition. She just showed up. Day after day, cookie after cookie, word after word. She opened her heart to people who didn't know how to be loved. She smiled. And she changed the world, one act of kindness at a time. The room was quiet, listening. And in the back, a little boy in a worn hoodie watched her closely, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes full of shadows. After the talk, he walked up to Lila and asked in a shaky voice, "Do you really think someone like her would have let someone like me in?" Lila didn't hesitate. "She already did," she said. "She built this place for you." And just like that, the circle began again. The end.